to you.
Now it's on.
Are you sure?
Yes, that look you have right now is on.
All right, good. I'm glad it's on. So, good help, so hard to find.
Especially when it's free.
Pay for what you get, what you pay for. So.
I was gonna say this is all you get when you're volley home to do something.
Yeah.
Oh, we have to be dramatic.
Anyways. All right, so we're going to continue through the life of Moses. We're in part 4 now. If you guys have missed any, I do have the notes for all of them so far up in the vestibule in that rack that's on one of the tables up there that it's got papers in them and stuff. You can get what you missed up there and stuff. But so we kind of dropped in size from last week. I went and made more copies because I was added another table, anticipating, okay, this is a good thing. And then, so, but it's okay. So, but we are going to finish out chapter 4 today of Exodus. And so where we ended off last week is Moses had just had his encounter with God at the burning bush. We're all familiar with that story. But some of us may have studied it more or whatever, but I think it's good that we went through the whole thing and talked about it and just how he, basically begged God not to send him, pick somebody else. He kept coming up with excuses, and then as to why he couldn't do it, and then when God shot down all of his excuses, he just said, please send somebody else. He started begging because he really didn't want to go and stuff. And so, but he finally relented and stuff. And so now we'll see what happens. He's going to, make his way to Egypt here. So in this section, but, so we're going to start out looking at verse 18 first. We're going to look at just that one verse, and then we'll take the next section. It says, so Moses went and returned to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, please let me go and return to my brethren who are in Egypt and see whether they are still alive. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. Okay. So we know that Moses fled Egypt when he killed the Egyptian, and Pharaoh wanted him dead. His adopted grandfather wanted him dead, and he had to flee. And so he fled and ended up in Midian. And he was sitting at a well, and he helped some women that came to the well, and they were the daughters of the priest of Midian. And he ended up marrying one of the daughters. The priest gave one of the daughters to him, and he ended up marrying him, had some kids. And this is all about 40 years he'd spent in Midian. Okay, Moses' life is broken up into 40-year segments. The first 40 years in Egypt, under Pharaoh, being rescued by Pharaoh's daughter, and then out of the river, and then about 40 years until he killed the Egyptian. And then 40 years in the desert of Midian. And then at 80 years old, he sees the burning bush and talks to God, and God gives him the plan for the next 40 years of his life. And Moses died at about 120, it's believed. So the 3 parts of his life are broken up in 40 years. So any of you that are 80 years old, which we don't have any in here today, that say that you can't do anything, Moses didn't get started until he was 80 years old. So, but and I know lifetimes were different and all that stuff. But anyway, so he's still at 80 years old. He's still going to go home and get his family and tell his father-in-law that he's leaving. He's not just going to leave the sheep, and because he's a shepherd, he's out and got a flock out there, and he's not just going to leave them and stuff. So he's at least being responsible enough for that he's going back and he's talking to his father-in-law. But you notice he doesn't tell his father-in-law that God talked to him through a burning bush, and that he was going back to Egypt to free the people. Why do you think that is?
He probably wouldn't have given him his blessing to go.
You're right. Probably wouldn't have given him his blessing. You might have told him to go, but not without his blessing, because you've obviously lost your mind and know you can't take my daughter and my grandkids with you. So,
I thought he was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Right. So, yeah. So I had never caught that before. That but it was pointed out in one of the, I think in Matthew Henry's commentary, he pointed out that, or maybe it was Wiersbe's, I'm not sure, but he pointed that fact out, that he didn't mention anything about the calling of God on him and stuff. And it's like, okay, yeah, you're right. It doesn't say that in there. So, but so at some point he would have had to have told him and everything. So, but so anyway, so he goes back and sees and gets his family, and now he's getting, and God speaks to him again, and that's 19 to 23. So God says, "Now the Lord said to Moses and Midian, go return to Egypt, for all the men who sought your life are dead." Then Moses took his wife and sons, and they set them on a donkey, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand. And the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do all these wonders before Pharaoh, which I have put in your hand. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I say to you, let my son go that he may serve me. But if you refuse to let him go, indeed, I will kill your son, your firstborn. All right. So God reassures Moses that everything, what's going to happen. Tells him that the ones that wanted him dead from, his actions 40 years ago are now dead. So he doesn't have to worry about that, because that was probably something weighing on his mind about would he get killed as soon as he got back there and stuff. And so, but God tells him no, that's not the case. Okay. But do you think it's fair that God's saying that he's going to harden Pharaoh's heart?
It was so good you brought that up, Bruce. Because I feel like I am the only person. But it would be several times in here Pharaoh would relent. And
Yeah.
he was going to, and then God hardened his heart again. And all these people are facing such awful things. And yeah, I was like, so I've struggled with that. I'm glad you brought that up.
I think he's tested Moses.
Okay.
So he comes back and says, if you refuse, Israel is my first son.
Yep.
Therefore, if you refuse, firstborn, then I will kill your firstborn.
Could have been testing Moses on it.
Just to see
yeah.
if he would go through.
Yeah.
And if he didn't, told him this is what's going to happen. He's going to go through.
Okay.
And I know he did it to let the people know he was the one true God.
Okay.
But it seemed real harsh to me that he hardened his heart.
Okay. And we'll see when we go through the plagues and the other stuff. Moses wasn't going to let them go free. He was going to let them go to the desert and worship God for a period of time, but then they had to come back to the oppression and everything else that they were under. So he wasn't really releasing them. He was just going to give them a break for a few days so that they could go out and worship God and then come back and go back to the work that they were doing. So it wasn't a total releasing. He didn't say go until after until the Passover and the angel of death came through and killed the firstborn sons. And so it wasn't, and so even with God hardening his heart, he wasn't, Pharaoh had no intention of releasing them completely at all. So they weren't, that wasn't on his agenda at all. And so, and also Pharaoh already had a hardened heart. He had already started hardening his heart because of the fact that he did have these people under so much oppression. For you to put that many people under oppression, you got to have a hard heart. I mean, to do that to so many people, it would be, like Adolf Hitler would be kind of a big example that we would have. We would be able to. I know there's been a lot of tyrants and whatever throughout history and stuff, but he would be one that for him to order and to head up all that happened in the Holocaust, it's just you got to have a hard heart to do those sort of things.
You gotta have evil.
Yeah, right.
Evil.
Yeah, and to think that, and we see now ISIS and groups like that do that, and they think they're doing it for Allah and stuff, and so it's really kind of sad in that way. But what he's saying here is that Israel, and see, I spent a bunch of time on that part of it. The one that was tripping me up and that I was having to look at is he's calling Israel his firstborn son. Well, Jesus is his only begotten son. So where are we on that? And I was just like, somebody's going to ask me that question. I need to be prepared for this. So I was going through. He looked to Israel as an adopted son. Okay, we are all now called sons and daughters of God because we are adopted into the family of God. These were adopted into the family of God. It was like an adopted son, and Moses would understand that because Pharaoh adopted him into his palace. He wasn't Egyptian, but he was treated as Egyptian royalty for all those years, and so he went and then made some choices that got him thrown out of it or whatever, but he was adopted in, and we're all adopted in. The Jews are God's chosen people. God chose them. He adopted them in to the family at a very early age. But Jesus is still his only begotten son. He is the only son that God has, and we all know that he's part of the Trinity and the three triune God and everything. And so, which that gets into a very complicated explanation. And so, yeah, we've already gone down that road. So, did that several years ago. So, but go back through YouTube. That might have been pre-YouTube. So, yeah. But yeah, so he's because I read that and I was just like, well, wait a minute, and so that just kind of plagued me. And so he wanted, and then the other thing that when I was reading that kind of went more with the hardening of the heart is that the Egyptians had a custom that when somebody died, any sin that was in their heart that was unconfessed to their gods or whatever, they would put a stone-shaped beetle over their heart, and that was supposed to harden their heart so that the sin couldn't be seen in their heart. And that was how they got forgiveness in their culture and their religion and belief, so that they would get into whatever heaven, their form of heaven, or the afterlife, or whatever. I think we're about the only ones that call it heaven. A lot of other religions call it the afterlife and stuff like that. And so I know I don't know but I've seen in movies where the Greeks and the Spartans and whatever, when they were fighting and all that stuff, and Troy and everything else and stuff, that when somebody would die, they would put coins over their eyes in order to go through the afterlife, get into the afterlife or whatever and stuff, and all these different customs and beliefs. Well, that's one that the Egyptians had, was to put this beetle over the heart on the person, and it would turn the person's heart hard so that the God couldn't see the sin in the person's heart. But there was no repentance. There was nothing. There was no repentance. There was no sorry for what I did or anything like that. It was just, I can do what I want because this beetle's going to take care of me after I'm dead. I ain't got enough faith for that, okay? So by God hardening Pharaoh's heart, he's kind of taking what their belief and their God system was and using it against him and stuff. And then, it took for Pharaoh to finally be broken of what, and even at that point, he said, okay, take them and go. And they plundered the Egyptians like God said they would. But then Pharaoh chased after them. And so he changed his mind again and chased after him after he's like, oh, what have I done? And the people are like, now we got to work. I mean, that's probably what the big deal was, is now the Egyptians were going to have to work. And they were just like, whoa, hold up, wait a minute. And so, and so he really never repented. Pharaoh never really repented and whatever. And, he saw the power of God. He saw the things that happened. Some of his magicians were able to do some of the things, and we'll see all that coming up. But yeah, so a lot of people do get, well, why is God being so mean to harden his heart? Why is he being so mean? And that's not the case. It's that Pharaoh's heart was already hardened, because you've got to have a hard heart, or like you said, evil, and to be able to do all that he was doing to these people and forcing them into all this labor and everything. And then he just got worse. When Moses came and started talking to him, he made it worse on the Israelites too. So, but yeah, so we see that it's going to take the killing of the firstborn son to get through to Pharaoh. All of us have something that finally breaks through to us, and we see our need for God at that point. Some of us, it may have been early on in life. Some of us, it may have been later on in life, and may have been through a lot of dramatic stuff, and a lot of, some people got to get to rock bottom, and rock bottom is different for everybody. My rock bottom can be a whole lot different than Justin's rock bottom. It can be a whole lot different than Wendy's rock bottom. It can be whatever. But generally, and a lot of, when you get to the point where you see your need for God, and you surrender and give to God your life, you're pretty much, I think that you're at your rock bottom. Now, if you're not, that's great. But you're at a point in your life where you're like, okay, I can't do this anymore, God. Most people that think that their life is great, and I'm king of the world, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and I've got all this money and power and success and everything else. A lot of those people don't, if they didn't already know God beforehand, they don't see a need for God, because their life is great in their mind. And they think that, because a lot of people believe that because I'm a good person, I'm going to get to go to heaven. Because the devil has told that lie so much that's believed. That's the common belief. And so, everybody hits their rock bottom, and Pharaoh losing his son put him at a rock bottom spot. And he said, okay, you guys, but he wasn't even looking to God, to get with God. He was like, okay, you're the cause of my problems, get out. That's what that was. That was you are the cause of my problems, you need to go. So it's like a couple in a bad marriage that one spouse is blaming the other one. I didn't have all these problems before you got here, get out. And that's how we end up with a 50% divorce rate in this country, is because people get to that point and they quit and they give up on it, and they, and stuff. And, I know there's a lot of, don't bash on me, because I know there's a lot of reasons and stuff that people get divorced. Okay, I get that. But that's definitely one. When you get people that are like, that look, especially now, we live in a culture now that nobody wants to take responsibility for what they're doing. They always try to point fault at somebody else. Okay.
That's those, when you see divorce decrees, I see them sometimes at work. And it says irreconcilable differences. That just means they don't drive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you say, somebody just,
Yeah.
I'm just tired of you,
Yeah.
There's neither one tries to compromise.
Right.
Just go.
Right. Yeah. Because we know marriage is a compromise. It's you're not gonna always get your way, contrary to what people believe. So and so but yeah, so you'll and you gotta understand that, and you gotta know that that's the case. So, but you don't always get the donkey you want. So, but
But you get a donkey.
so, but anyways, so yeah, so that's what it's, you know, Pharaoh's heart is already pretty well hardened here, and God, yes, but like I said, also he's not going to let them go permanently. He's just gonna let them go worship, and then he's expecting them to come back and whatever. So I'm sure that they were going to go out into the desert heavily armed, or not heavily armed, but guarded with the Egyptian army to make sure that they didn't get away. So it wasn't like he was releasing them totally. So, but he had a good thing going. He wanted to keep abusing them. So, but all right, we good there? All right, now let's move on to the next challenging part of this, because this next section is kind of challenging too. Okay, 24 through 26. Then it came to pass at the encampment that the Lord met him and sought to kill him. And this is Moses is talking about. Then Zipporah took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at Moses' feet and said, "Surely you are a husband of blood to me." So he let him go. Then she said, "You are a husband of blood because of the circumcision." Anybody want to try that one?
No, that is another one I'm glad you brought up.
Okay.
There was nothing
Yeah.
pretext to that,
Right.
to tell why
Right.
he was going to,
Kill Moses?
Yeah.
The guy he sent into Egypt to
Yeah.
free the people?
yeah,
Okay. All right. Yep. Okay. You're right. There is no pretext to that.
yeah. So that,
Okay.
when I first read that,
Yeah.
that was like, I went back and reread it a couple times, and then I kind of went back up, and this has been some time back
Yeah.
to see what I had missed.
You didn't miss nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What you got, Woody? I know you study ahead, so what you got?
Right here, the only thing I can think of is he wanted to, because the wife sacrificed and
Circumcise the son.
circumcised the son
Yeah.
to save Moses.
Yeah.
One thing I can think of is God was testing to see that what he's done and all that is when the people sacrifice certain things to save Moses.
Mm.
Moses went into a certain situation
Okay.
to where, he went somewhere, had this huge responsibility to get the slaves free from Pharaoh.
Mm-hmm.
But what he had to go back to, he had a lot of, as they say, skeletons in the closet
Yeah.
to take care. I mean, to go and deal with at the same time.
Yeah.
And when he came, when he was coming back, the only thing I think of is maybe God was just was testing. Hey,
Okay.
Moses sacrificed all this. Are they going to sacrifice something for Moses? So Moses sacrificed himself for them.
And it could be, because we really don't know the total true answer to this. Okay. Could be that God was testing to see if they would sacrifice something for Moses. But Moses was near the point of death here.
Yeah.
He was so sick that the wife was getting involved. Okay. Okay. So the general consensus between the scholars in the commentaries is that Moses is wife, because Moses has two sons, but there's only talk of her circumcising one. The belief is that Moses circumcised the older son because that was the covenant custom with Abraham and God, and because Moses is a descendant of Abraham, he would have known that. He would have been circumcised because he was with his parents for, quite a while. Circumcised on the 8th day. He was with his parents for like 3 months before he was put in the river and all that stuff. So he was circumcised. He would have circumcised the first son. The wife, being a daughter of the priest of Midian, total different belief, probably objected strongly to what he did. And so Moses apparently didn't circumcise the second son. And so, because Moses wasn't being obedient to the covenant that he had established, and with him going back to free the children of Israel, who all the males would have been circumcised, they would have all gone through this, and then for him to come back with his son that's not circumcised, if it would have been found out, then that would have called into question his true leadership of the people. Okay? And so what God is doing here is God is because he hadn't done this, God is putting an affliction on Moses to try to get him to do it. But apparently Moses was a little afraid of his wife.
Don't say.
Or what was the original preparer of the happy wife, happy life motto? Kind of thing. And so he didn't want to upset his wife by doing it to the second son. And
my Bible says the same thing. It was evident for the son was not circumcised. And then led back to Genesis 17, 9 through 14, where it talks about the covenant, whether it's your son or one that was bought with your money to be your son.
right,
You must circumcise him to keep the covenant.
right, exactly. Right. And so the point that we need to get from that.
Let me ask something though
Okay.
while we're here. You know, so many people say that with the New Testament, when Jesus came and sacrificed,
Yep.
that did away with so much.
Mhm.
Circumcision now,
Right,
and I know that we're not Jews, but
right.
But in a family that just had children, what is your thoughts on that? Do you think that, and this was, I know that it was a Jewish thing, but like
Right.
Justin said, if someone comes into your home, even had a child been adopted, or even as slaves, even if it was a male, they were supposed to be circumcised, right?
Right.
But in relation to this day and time, you know, doctors will say that it's a cleanliness thing, that's all, you know, just.
Yeah.
But, so is that something that should be?
It's entirely up to the parents of a non-Jewish family if they want to do it or not. Okay. Paul addressed this in his letters to some of the churches, and he had to address it in several of them, because a lot of the Jewish believers were trying to make the Gentiles go and get circumcised and Paul said, no, you don't have to do that because we're not under the law anymore. You're not part of the covenant. That covenant was with the Jews, and that's not the same covenant that we have with God now. Okay.
I do remember reading that.
Right. And so he addressed that. He said, if you choose to, that's on you. But no, it is not a requirement for salvation to be, or to even have that communication, that covenant with God. So, and over the years, science and whatever have proven that it is better for the cleanliness of it or whatever, and you know, cleanliness of it an issue or whatever. But it's a total decision by the parents of the children. And I mean, I imagine Jewish families still do it regularly, and there's no question about it. But as far as non-Jewish families, okay. Now, Paul did have, I believe it was Timothy, who was half Greek, half Jew. Paul circumcised him because he was serving in the ministry, and he didn't want that to be a stumbling block for the people. That, well, we can't believe him because he's not circumcised or whatever. I don't understand how that was so commonly known back in those days. Because, okay, I mean, so, but this was a huge deal in these days, and a huge deal in the new church, in the early church too.
Yeah.
I mean, for Paul to address, I think there's like 3 letters to different places that he addresses that same issue. And it's, you know, so now if I dig deep enough like I did, and I found out about the beetle that hardens the heart in Egypt, because I didn't know that one either until I was looking into some of my commentaries and stuff, and the history of it and whatever. But yeah, so, you know, maybe some point in time I'll be able to find out how exactly this was so commonly known, whether they were you know, I don't know. But I guess public toilets takes on a whole different meaning than what we're,
They didn't
But-
have stalls back in those.
apparently not, no. So, but anyway, so yeah, so, but so no, so it's entirely up to the family now and stuff. So, as to what you choose to do. And it doesn't really have anything to do with your belief in God or not. Because I know a lot of people that have never stepped foot inside a church, or atheists and whatever, had their children circumcised. So, because it's science says it's better, and stuff. So, but yeah, so, but the big thing to draw from this is here's Moses being obedient to go and to do the calling that God has given him and to go work to free the people of Israel. But even in that, technically he was still out of God's will because he wasn't following the covenant that was in effect at this time with his children. And like Justin just read, it says your children or your sons and any of the sons in your household will come into your household as slaves or whatever else will be circumcised. Okay? And so he wasn't being obedient in that. Okay? So even if we are following God and still we have an area of our life that we are not following God, that he has made it clear that this is what you're supposed to be doing. We're not following God. We are in outright sin. Doesn't matter that you're going to do the will of God. You're still going to be dealt with by God.
Yeah.
And I think we see that with some of these huge, sad to say, but some of these huge preachers that have fallen. Because we can go out, we're all old enough here, I'm sure. The PTL scandal back in the day. Everybody knows about that. Okay? There was a lot of stuff going on there that shouldn't have been going on, and God brought that ministry down. Doesn't matter that you're doing God's work and you may be helping people and whatever. If you're not being obedient, you're going to do more harm than good. Okay? There are preachers out there now that all they're doing is trying to fill their wallet. And they're doing it at the expense of God's people. And if you're hurting God's people, then you're going to be dealt with by God. And that's what this, to me, is saying right here. And his wife went and stepped in, intervened, whatever you want to say. She obviously wasn't real happy about it because she cast it at his feet and said, "You are a husband of blood to me." And then clarified it. And, after he got better, she said, "You're a husband of blood because of the circumcision." So she told him twice. So she obviously wasn't happy about it. But that was what God wanted, because that was the covenant. And that was to show that you were with God. Okay? And we are called as the leaders of the church to be, and just not even leaders of the church, but anybody. But if you're serving in any capacity, if you don't take care of your family first, it says as I got in 1 Timothy 5:8, it says that if you don't take care of your family, you're worse than a non-believer. Okay? Your first calling is to take care of your family. And then, but you're also to be doing God's will, working for God. But if you go and say, "Oh, I'm just going to go serve God, and I'm going to leave my family. So if anybody says that God told them to leave their family, get away from them, because they're lying. God would never tell somebody to leave their family. Now, a lot of people will argue and say, well, the disciples left everything to go follow him. Okay, Peter's wife got martyred with him. So they didn't, yes, they weren't off on the mission trips, or they're not mentioned on the mission trips with him, but we know Peter's mother-in-law, that she was sick. They knew it. Jesus went and healed her. Okay. And that's just one case. We don't know how many of them were married before they got called as disciples. There's a lot of discussion about Paul being married. As a high-ranking Pharisee, he would have had to have been married to be that high up in the Pharisees, because they were totally opposite of what the Catholics do, in that you can't be married. You must be celibate as a Catholic. But, or used to be, I don't know anymore. But Paul, as a Pharisee, would have had to have been married to get that high up in it. Okay. But he does say at one point, it is better to be single like I am. Okay. Now that begs an argument, and one of my classes that we had this discussion, and was he widowed? Or was he never married? Because we know that divorce wouldn't have been right unless his wife was Jewish, which she would have been if as a Pharisee, and she would not accept his new belief. In which case, Paul that's one of the grounds, biblical grounds of divorce. If the spouse, if you become saved and your spouse doesn't, and the spouse won't accept and tells you to leave, doesn't want to be in a relationship anymore, then you are free to leave. Okay, so that could be how too. But there was actually, I had to write a paper where I had to argue my opinion on that, and me being a recent widow, it was very easy for me, because I said if Paul was widowed, it would have been in his writings, because as life changing as this is, it would have been in his writings. Okay, so I don't think he was widowed, but maybe that was the case, but we don't know. Y'all can ask him when you get there. I got more other things I want to find out. That's not high on my list. Okay, but yeah. So, but it's so even the disciples, they didn't. Some of them might have their relationships may have broke up and stuff like that or whatever. I don't know. We don't know that for sure, but we do know that Peter was around his mother-in-law and around his wife, and so his wife might have gone with them, because it says that there were women with them that went with them, so it might have been the wives, it might have been whatever and stuff. And so we don't know, but the church history says that Peter's wife got martyred with Peter. In fact, they made Peter watch his wife get martyred before he was martyred, as punishment to make it. And she was proclaiming the name of Jesus as she was being crucified as well. So, but yeah. So, but the bottom line is that we need to, if we're going to serve God in any capacity, we need to be making sure we are living obedient lives and taking care of our family as well. And that if we're not leading our family in the way of God and in the way of the Lord, especially as men, there's a higher level of it placed on a man, because he's called to lead the family in the way of God. And so, but even for a woman, it's still a responsibility you have a major influence in the family. You are required to, lead the family in that way as well and stuff. And so, so Moses' wife steps in here, takes that responsibility on, steps in and does the circumcision. And then Moses gets better and gets healed and stuff. And so, okay, I think that's where we're going to end today. We'll pick up. We didn't get all the way through chapter 4, but we'll finish it up next week. So,
But we have more understanding about stuff going out today, even if we didn't
okay.
get all the way through.
Well, good.